All right. Very good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining Southeast Asia Economies and Business Economics. Today, we will talk about poverty in Southeast Asia. Jonathan and Leah will do a presentation on what poverty is, how actually it is in Southeast Asia, and what the governments can do to reduce the number of poor people in the region. All right. Without further ado, please give it up for Jonathan and Leah. Jonathan, Leah, time's
Yes.
yours.
Good morning and welcome to a presentation about poverty in Southeast Asia. First, we will define what Southeast Asia means. Then we will take a closer look at the term of poverty and compare absolute and relative poverty. After that, we will go into the basics of poverty in Southeast Asia and then tell you about child poverty. After that, we will explain the vicious cycle of poverty and then go into the economic growth related to poverty change. Finally, Nate goes into more detail about the corona pandemic in relation to poverty.
All right, I will start with the definition of Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia consists of 11 countries, including many island nations. It today includes Brunei, Indonesia, Cambodia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, East Timor, and Vietnam. With more than 594 million people living in these countries, Indonesia is the most populous country in Southeast Asia, with 267 million people. Brunei has the smallest population with 400,000. Singapore is the smallest country in Southeast Asia, but it has the highest population density. Next, we go with the geographical features of Southeast Asia. All countries in Southeast Asia have access to the sea except Laos. The Indian Ocean is in the west and the Pacific Ocean is in the east. These two seas are also the natural borders of the west, south, and east. The two seas are separated by the Strait of Malacca, one of the most important maritime trade routes. Other seas of East Asia, for example, South China Sea or Gulf of Thailand. Lea, kannst du kurz dein Mikrofon ausmachen? Man hört mich doppelt. Next, we want to talk about Southeast Asia and its religions. Southeast Asia is characterized by religious diversity. There are followers of all major world religions in this area. This is due to the region's historical role as a trading center. Buddhism makes up the majority of about 240 million people. Christians, especially Catholicism, is dominant in East Timor and the Philippines. Hinduism is mainly found in Bali, Indonesia. Islam is also common in Southeast Asia, especially Indonesia, Brunei, and Malaysia. Last but not least, there are also Confucian followers, especially in Singapore and Malaysia. Next, we want to talk about the language in Southeast Asia. The linguistic diversity in this area is very impressive. As you can see on the next slide, Southeast Asia languages are an excellent sources of research on the diversity of the region, showing the historical impacts and localization of those impacts that make the regions particularly interesting. The people in Southeast Asia speak about 1,200 languages in total. The main languages spoken in Southeast Asia are started with Laos, Thai, Burmese, Khmer, Vietnamese, Tagalog, Malay, Indonesian, and Chinese dialects.
Nate, ganz kurz, er hat gerade geschrieben, dass er die Folien nicht sieht. Ich muss das nochmal neu sharen.
Yes, talking about Southeast Asia, I want to talk about the climate. The climate of Southeast Asia is mainly tropical, with high temperatures and humidity all year around and heavy rainfalls. Most of Southeast Asia has rainy and dry season caused by seasonal wind changes and monsoons. The rainforest is the second largest on the planet, with heavy monsoon rainfalls. Southeast Asia is one of the most vulnerable regions to climate change in the world. Despite being one of the most vulnerable regions, Southeast Asia countries are lagging behind in terms of their climate mitigation measures.
Okay, now I will go on with defining poverty. There are many practical definitions of poverty. People who live in poverty and lack a wide range of economic and other resources are sometimes referred to as poor or low income. Some consider the term as subjective and comparative. Some consider it moral and judgmental, while others consider it science-based. As mentioned before, poverty can be understood in many ways. The most important concepts to understand are firstly an explanation of the material needs, including daily necessities, such as food and clothing. Poverty in this sense can be understood as the lack of essential goods and services. Secondly, an explanation of social needs and social exclusion, dependence, and the ability to participate in society. This includes education and information. Thirdly, an explanation of sufficient income and the lack of assets. The meaning sufficient varies greatly in different political and economic regions of the world. Now I will go on with the indicators of poverty. There are several indicators that are used to create specific indices, such as, for example, the Human Poverty Index, which illustrates the standard of living in the respective country. Then there is also the gross domestic product, which measures the production of goods and services domestically after deducting all indemnicate consumption. It is primarily a measure of production. The gross domestic product is calculated as the sum of the gross value added of all sectors of the economic plus the balance of taxes and subsidies on products. Poverty is determined as a multi-layered and multidimensional phenomenon that includes numerous socioeconomic indicators such as low income, a lack of food, high infant mortality, low life expectancy, low educational opportunities, poor drinking water, and a bad health care. Going now on with the absolute versus the relative poverty. So absolute poverty is a condition in which a household income is below the level required to maintain a basic standard of living, such as, for example, food or a place to live. This condition allows you to compare countries in the passage of time. Absolute poverty could be set at a constant real income level. However, it is necessary to consider differences in living standards between countries. With this equivalent income, it could be, for example, possible to have a home in Africa, but that money is not enough to live in New York. In addition, thoughts about what is considered a necessary item of life can change over time. For example, hundreds of years ago, it was like food and housing, but especially in today's Western countries, the term can be extended into include access of food, housing, electricity, and the basic medical services. Relative poverty is a condition in which the household income is below the median income at a certain rate.
So let's move on with the poverty in Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia is a place of extreme poverty as well as top business ventures. Not all Asian countries are poor, but large gaps in the economic situation of people in different parts of Asia are driving researchers at the rise of poverty in Southeast Asia. The first and most important reason is the huge population. Almost 60% of the world's population lives in Asia. Population densities are not the same everywhere, but tremendous population growth and the resource depletion are one of the main causes of poverty in Southeast Asia. Another reason is food security. The Asian 60% of the world's hunger live in Asia. Since 2000, basic food prices have risen, leading to food insecurity for the poor, who spend most of their income on food. Various factors such as urbanization, population growth, reduced farmland, and the inadequate governance are responsible for increasing food insecurity in Southeast Asia. Lack of education also causes poverty. According to UNESCO, about 30% of adults in Southeast Asia are illiterate, and about 1/3 of primary school children lack the basic math and literary skills that is essential for further education. There's also a large gender education gap in Southeast Asia, where only 62% of young women can read and write, compared to 77% of young men. The next reason is health. Malnutrition in women and children is another factor. Almost 69% of children with acute malnutrition live in Southeast Asia, resulting in weight loss and stunted growth. Women are also vulnerable to this situation, with nearly 80% of adolescent women suffering from anemia. The next reason on the next slide is administration. According to the 2050 Corruption Perception Index, 60% of Southeast Asian countries score less than 50, indicating a serious corruption problem. Poor governance and administrative corruptions give the lucky few people access to the financial power and promote poverty among the masses. Asian countries also suffer from natural disasters. They rely primarily on agriculture, forestry, and tourism, all of which can be affected by natural disasters. In 2015, half of the world's natural disasters, including earthquakes, droughts, wildfires, storms, extreme temperatures, and floods, occurred in Asia-Pacific regions, causing significant economic losses. The next reason is global recession. Global recession in the global market has caused the majority of Southeast Asian workers or workers in the United States and Western Europe to lose their jobs, adversely affecting the economic situation to their families. The last reason is social discrimination. In some Southeast Asian countries, caste discrimination is widespread at various levels of society. This prohibits equal opportunity to the masses and makes certain sectors of the population poorer than others. So let's now talk about child poverty in Southeast Asia. The majority of poverty-stricken children were born to poor parents whose incomes are well below the monetary threshold, which puts them within the category of absolute poverty. Factors contributing to low income in families are low skill level, short hours, low pay rates, lack of progression, and underrepresentation in labor market. The next reason for child poverty is physical and mental health. In many areas in Southeast Asia, they lack proper medical facilities and sanitation practices of which prevent the spread of diseases and infections. As they get older, poor children are more likely to have chronic health problems, such as asthma and anemia. These impacts probably reflect issues related to poverty, including a substandard diet, infectious conditions, poor neighborhood environment, reduces access to goods and activities, and the physiological stress. Also, many children in Southeast Asia are affected by mental illnesses caused by pressured parents, social inclusion, or the social capital. Another reason for child poverty is the characteristics of the individuum. Factors like the age, disabilities, ethnicities, religion, sex, LGBT, geographic locations also play major parts in the development of poverty. The last reason is cognitive development. Young poverty-stricken children are deprived with the basic tools such as uniform, books, bags, etc. needed for academic start. Very few schooling infrastructures are built that is suitable for young children, so the level of acceptance is minimal therefore, many of which are denied the critical building blocks of cognitive development. For those who are given the opportunity, also lack schooling as they prioritize work, as the main focus is to efforts to help and support their families' low-income earnings.
Okay, I will now go on with the vicious circle of poverty. So poverty can be seen as a consequence of underdevelopment. This is due to the fact that those affected lack certain elementary skills, take advantage of important opportunities in life. In addition, especially people born in developing countries cannot help their situation and are often not able to change anything on their own, since they have no influence on these conditions. The individual characteristics of the developing countries are each strung together in a chain of causes and effects, and the different characteristics of poverty are interrelated. There are main causes of poverty. The main causes are being poor over generation and a lack of opportunities, but there are much more. These are, for example, state discrimination and corruption, a lack of social integration and education, crime, natural disasters, substance abuse, for example, alcoholism or drug abuse, then historical factors, for example, imperialism, overpopulation, or war. Then there are also effects of poverty, which include starvation, a lack of sanitation, diseases and disabilities, low healthcare services, a high crime rate and risk of potential violence, like for example, war or terrorism, homelessness and drug abuse, a lack of opportunities for employment, or an increased discrimination. This creates a circle that always returns to the poor, to poverty as a whole bundle of problems. This cycle of poverty is determined by both internal and external factors and is also referred to as the vicious circle of poverty. This picture depicts a circle of poverty. Starting with poverty itself, this has an influence on an inadequate diet. This is the case because poverty means a low level of prosperity, and therefore one often cannot eat a balanced diet. Because, for example, the financial means are lacking. This unhealthy diet in turn leads to poor health, since the health condition deteriorates significantly due to an unbalanced diet. Poor health then, to the human body, this is not efficient if it's not good in a state of health, which will also affect the psyche in long term. This low productivity has again a huge influence on the income, which will decrease in these conditions more and more and lead thus again to the starting point, the poverty. What also reinforced the vicious circle of poverty is the fact that poor people are less willing to invest because they do not want to take risks with their assets. As a result, poor people often remain poor and the rich become wealthier. It is very difficult to break this vicious circle, however, it is not impossible. Poverty can be tried to be eliminated gradually if it's possible to break the negative sequence of causes and effects. Raising the level of education, for example, would be a first step in the right direction. Now I will go on with facts how to prevent poverty. To prevent poverty, one of the most important tasks is to educate children. This not only gives many more children in the world the opportunity to get a good job later, but also gives children from poor families the chance to escape the poverty circle. In addition, fresh drinking water should always be available for everyone, and everybody should have the possibility to get healthcare, especially in the case of need. It is also of great importance that women and girls finally experience equal rights and have the same opportunities in life as a man. Another aspect is nutrition, especially for children. No child should be hungry, and care should be taken to ensure that everyone has access to the consumable food. Otherwise, there is the possibility of quickly falling ill, which in turn leads to poverty. Climate change also has an impact on poverty, which is why organizations that are committed to environmental protection should be supported. In addition, it is important to be close to children in difficult life situations and to help them to escape from difficult situations. For example, child marriage is another aspect that should be taken care of in order to fight poverty, because when young girls get pregnant at an early age, they do not get an education and are dependent for the rest of their lives. This can quickly plunge them into poverty. To sum up, there are two basic factors that must be in place to reduce poverty. Firstly, the economic growth, which includes a good infrastructure and trade policy. And secondly, the social equality, which includes social standards and country distribution. If these two factors are given, poverty can be fought if there is possibility for every human right to have access to the aspects I mentioned before. Okay, I will now go on with the economic growth related to the poverty change. So this chart shows the real growth of the GDP in Asian countries from 2011 to 2021 and gives forecast up to 2027. The x-axis shows an annual scale, the y-axis the change in GDP from the previous year given in percent. From 2011 to 2019, GDP in all countries has always changed like relatively the same, on average around 7% from the previous year. In 2013 and 2016, Thailand recorded a drop of about -3%, but in 2019 it had also increased again. In 2020, the change for all countries was in the negative range. The Philippines was hit the hardest with a 10% year-on-year change in GDP. Singapore's GDP rebounded in 2021 and the other countries moved back into positive territory. The only country that was still extremely affected in 2021 was Myanmar, with a rate of change of -18% compared with the previous year. These cuts are most likely related to the corona crisis, which triggered a decline in economic growth worldwide. The forecasts for the following years are again consistently in positive territory for all countries. Before the COVID-19 pandemic broke out, Southeast Asia was a global success story in promoting growth and reducing poverty. However, the pandemic had a significant impact on it. Signs of improvement are in sight, but the total output in the region this year is still expected to be at least 10% below than what it would have been without COVID-19. In crises like these, attention must be paid to rising income inequality. Rising inequality has a negative impact on growth and increases disincentive for low-skilled workers. It also reduces labor productivity. It hinders education and skills development for those without sufficient income or credit. Thus, economic growth significantly affects the poverty rate, because when a country is economically worse off, more people must live in poverty at the same time.
So, as the last topic, we want to talk more about the corona pandemic. A pandemic of coronavirus disease put 4.7 million people in Southeast Asia into extreme poverty in 2021, according to a report from the New Asian Development Bank, represented at the Southeast Asian Development Symposium. The hardest hits were unskilled retainers, informal economic workers, and small businesses without a digital presence. The pandemic also led to a widespread unemployment, widespread inequality, and increased poverty, especially among Southeast Asian women, young workers, and the elderly. The region is still experiencing new variants of COVID-19, growing global interests in interest rates and disruption to the supply chain, while facing with global headwinds such as rising commodity prices and inflation. As of February 21, 2022, 59% of the region's population is fully vaccinated, according to the report. Calls on Southeast Asian governments to allocate more resources to help health systems provide care, improve disease monitoring, and respond to further pandemics. Investing in health can boost economic growth by increasing the participants and productivity of the workforce and therefore help to decrease poverty. Countries should implement structural reform to increase their competitiveness and productivity. This includes simplifying business processes, removing trade barriers, and encouraging SMEs to adopt new technologies. It may also include skill upgrades to help workforce with research labor market is also transformation. So this was our presentation about the topic poverty in Southeast Asia. I hope you like it, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask.
Thank you, Jonathan and Leah. That was really great. Questions to Jonathan and Leah, please. Any questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes, please.
So in the case of poverty and the state of development in a country, so what do you think about Indonesia? It is more a developing country or more an emerging country for you?
I think Indonesia is considered as a lower middle income country. The urban regions have long had the economic power of an emerging market, but in many rural areas, the state is still a developing country, I think.
Yes, you're right. Indonesia is currently considered as a lower middle income country. That means the GDP growth has been stuck for many years, and we need innovation, more productive economy, just like what South Korea did in past 10 years, South Korea invested in many strategic sectors, and the creativity, productivity, innovations, those sort of things, increased dramatically, and that makes South Korea got rid of from income trap. Indonesia can go further, step forward into upper middle income and then a higher income if we follow the success story of South Korea. Speaking of poverty in Indonesia, if you look at the World Bank data, 2.2% of Indonesia's total population, approximately 270 million inhabitants, we have like 6 million, approximately 6 million people, living below $1.90 per day, as suggested by the World Bank. Extreme poverty is measured by income earned by a person below $1.90. So, according to the World Bank, 2.2% of the population, Indonesia's population, live in extreme poverty. 6 million people. Imagine that. But if you look at the percentage of total population from the World Bank data, among Asian countries, Timor-Leste showed the greatest percentage of poverty rate, which is 22%, right? 22% of its total population of approximately 1.3 million inhabitants live in extreme poverty. But in absolute numbers, that's actually 260,000 people approximately in Timor-Leste live in extreme poverty. So if we refer to the percentage, Timor-Leste is the poorest country in Southeast Asia. But if we consider, or if we look at the absolute number, Indonesia is actually the poorest country in Southeast Asia, which is 6 million people live below $1.90 per day. But thank you, Leah and Jonathan, and also Caroline, for your questions. Any other question, please? I have one question. Yeah, if you look at World Bank website, the World Bank has a target to have no more than 3% of the world's population living on just $1.90 a day by 2030. Do you think this is a realistic target, Jonathan, Leah?
I think it was a realistic target until the corona pandemic breakout. I think they were on a really good way, and as I've mentioned, Southeast Asia was on a good way, growing economics year by year. But I think for the moment, it's like more the goal to get to the level of poverty which they have been before the pandemic. And I think after that, they can concentrate on making further goals and setting maybe the limit a few years later. But I think it's really unrealistic right now.
Yes, great. Yes, poverty eradication is one of the SDGs, SDGs agenda, right? Sustainable Development Goals agenda. Yes, for almost 25 years, the number of people living in extreme poverty, which is less than $1.90 per person per day, was steadily declining, actually. But the trend was interrupted in 2020 when poverty rose because of the disruption caused by the COVID-19 crisis, and combined with the effects of conflict, Ukraine war, and so on, and climate change, the road to poverty eradication is getting difficult. Even though global poverty has more recently resumed its pre-pandemic downward trajectory, 75 to 95 million additional people could be living in extreme poverty in 2022. compared to the pre-COVID-19 projections. That's because of, once again, the effects of pandemic, the war, and don't forget raising inflation following the pandemic. Some research suggests that the effects of the current crisis will almost certainly be felt in most countries through 2030. And under these conditions, the goal of bringing the global absolute poverty rate to less than 3% by 2030, which was already at risk before the pandemic, is now beyond reach unless countries take swift, significant, and substantial policy action. Right, excellent, Jonathan and Leah. Question, yes, questions to Jonathan and Leah? Anyone? No more questions? Right. All right, if there's no question, let me sum up what Jonathan and Leah talk about. So this is very interesting. Poverty is typically defined as a condition in which a person or community lacks the financial resources and essentials for a minimum standard of living, right? Poverty means that the income level from employment is so low that basic human needs can't be met. Poor people do not have proper housing, clean water, healthy food, and medical attention. Poverty has a range of different socio-economic dimensions, including the ability to access services and express opinions and choice. Poverty is also the root cause of many human rights and labor rights violations. Child labor, forced labor, and human trafficking are each deeply connected to poverty. And the World Bank states, as I said earlier, that people living in extreme poverty earn less than $1.90 a day. And currently more than 700 million people, or approximately 10% of the global population, still live in such extreme poverty. Some experts predict the number of poor people will continue to rise as a result of COVID-19 crisis, alongside the ongoing impacts of conflicts, Ukraine war, and climate change, right? So that's all our meeting today. We'll meet again next week. Take care and bye now.